Hello everyone, I'm Mangin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Confiant. Hope you've all been enjoying the conference so far today. So my talk for you all today is going to be about malvertising and macOS malware. So diving right in, how many of you in the audience actually know how the security model works on Apple computers? Okay, one person, great. So for those that don't know, the basis of Apple's security system is what's called their System Integrity Protection Framework. It was launched in 2015, and it has three major components that are apps. It has the Gatekeeper app, the XProtect app, and the Notarization app. These apps work together to create kind of a prevent, block, and remediate model. It's how Apple describes it on their site. And so Gatekeeper and Notarization are the first layer, and they're there to ensure that only apps that have been verified by Apple with a signature, with notarization as well, a locking of the code, are going to be allowed to play on the computer. The types of constraints Apple puts into that is quite significant. So the SIP framework is one that really works around limiting the controls of what the app can do when it loads onto the device. And so this type of controlled access, it limits the ability to load kernels, limits the ability to modify system files, to deep access certain processes like debugging or accessing data vaults. The XProtect is kind of the final step. XProtect is what, as of when a malware has actually executed, is able to constrain the malware's actions. All these things come together overall to present a pretty strong security system for the Apple computers, but it is not one without limitations. So how is it limited? How does macOS malware come in the door? Well, there's really two main paths. Either they're coming through the front door, where they're actually purchasing fake IDs and getting registered with the Apple Gatekeeper and Notarization process and actually getting allowed in directly. They could also steal them. They could also rent them from people. There's a variety of different ways, but basically socially engineer their way to get to an Apple Engineer ID is the primary mechanism. There is also a lot of backdoors. So remember that framework that I described, it was created in 2015. That means that any software running pre to that gives an opportunity if the bad actor is able to access it, they can leverage their way in and basically escape that sandbox that Apple is creating, escalate their privileges and really just do an end run around it, just bypass it. And so the risk there is obviously the zero-day risks, vulnerabilities that get created every time that software landscape grows and there's more and more operating code, and the system itself keeps growing. It's going to create new opportunities for 0 days vulnerabilities, and it's going to allow the bad actors to again figure out how to bypass the framework. It's a strong framework, but it does definitely have its weaknesses, and that historic code, the legacy code base that Apple is running is a big part of that vulnerability. So when you actually look at what comprises macOS malware, things start getting more interesting. So this is a list of the big malware families that are running on Apple today. And so Slayer is the #1 macOS malware. It accounts for over 30% of the infections from a Mac malware perspective. Slayer was first detected in 2018 by Intego. Kaspersky did a lot of research around this in 2019 as they saw it start multiplying number of families. And interestingly enough, that year it infected 10% of all Kaspersky's devices, so all their testing environment. That's a huge spread. That's a big penetration for something that's just come on the scene. All the other, so beyond Slayer, the other malware is really known as PUPs, so potentially unwanted programs, aka spyware. But so all these, 90% of these malware families are actually delivering adware. That's the actual exploit that they're looking to execute on these devices. And so when I was researching this and pulling together this data, there's two things that kind of popped out to me that I thought was really that was interesting and worth talking about. The first is that delivers adware is not the same as being adware. So from a security perspective, this is a very important distinction. We all know that malware it's like security issues happen in multiple hops these days. It's not just a one and done thing. They're able to leverage a lot of incremental steps. And so distinguishing between the malware versus adware is really critical. And if you actually look into what the composition of those malwares are, yes, they are delivering adware, but the malware itself is Trojans or backdoors. And so it's a much more accurate thing to say, hey, 90% of macOS malware are Trojans and backdoors. I know of which the big three families, so Slayer, obviously we talked about, that's a Trojan type virus. Bundlor, Crosswriter, for a variety of different names. It's a backdoor software installer, and Pirit is the third major family. So all of those today serve adware as the primary attack type, but the components of it, of what they are themselves, what is Pirit, what is Slayer, what is Bundlor, those actually matter quite much more because they can be used for other purposes. Slayer especially, if you dive into the research around it, is a huge risk from a cybersecurity perspective because it's a very poorly coded Trojan. And so it's very easily repurposed. The code is poor, it can easily be switched to do something else, install anything else. And so that's the risk. That right there, that's the number that's just when you see that and you're like, all right, 90% of the macOS malware, Trojans, or backdoors, that really just strikes me as something that's very important to talk about. So the other main thing that kind of was surprising about this is the question of, all right, so why? Why does 90% of the macOS malware serve adware? And well, the answer to that, really simple. It's the money. Adware makes cyber criminals $65 billion a year. The ad industry, the ad tech industry, which is one that Confiant is an expert in, knows it as ad fraud. You all know it as adware. Nonetheless, the result is that over 10% or 12.5% of last year's digital marketing budgets for online advertising got sucked into this and got stolen. And so compare that to ransomware. Last year in ransomware, bad actors made $20 billion. Adware, 65. And the adware dollars didn't have to be money laundered. They actually got paid that money from a legitimate buyer, and it got paid into legitimate accounts, and they now have access to that very, very free money. And so if you actually talk to specialists around ad fraud in the ad tech industry, they will most likely tell you that 12.5% is questionable. It could easily be higher. And it's not surprising. If you think of how 40% of the internet traffic is robots, it almost surprises me that only 12% of all the ad traffic is robots. There's a disconnect there. So the reason all that matters is because of this stat. Because in 2021, 23% of devices in US companies that had over 1,000 employees were Macintosh devices. And that number was up from 17% in 2019. So if the same growth curve continues, Mac devices in enterprise will be over 50% by 2027, so 5 years from now. The changing attack surface that this represents is a land shift. These Trojans that are serving up and are hitting these Mac devices and are infecting quite dramatic numbers of them are non-trivial in their sophistication and are not yet been fully weaponized in all the different ways they can be used to attack US enterprises. This is fundamentally a recipe for disaster. There's a lot of risk to this. And so when you think of attack surface, obviously the rise of Macs coincides with the rise of what's called what is external attack surface management. It's one of the keywords that the industry seems to be talking a lot about this year. When I see external attack surface, I really think, well, that's the internet, right? But we can come up with new terms. So what's old is old and what's new is new, and we just play with it. But from a perspective of you as security engineers and security researchers and security software buyers, this report from Randori got bought by IBM earlier this year. They did a report around external attack surface management, did a survey of over almost 400 professionals in the US and in Canada that were decision makers around security software. There was a few stats from the report that really struck me and that I wanted to call out for you. One was obviously the fact that external attack surface is the number one investment priority for large enterprises. That's not surprising. We are all waking up to the fact that the internet has a lot of dragons in it and they are dangerous. And just because they are not inside your network does not mean that your brand and that your company is not at risk because of what they do. And so this conceptualization of the attack surface have both internal and external components is a really interesting it's a really interesting development because it represents to our mind, or at least my mind especially, that it's a more honest representation of the true risks that are at play here. So, number one investment priority, interesting. The fact that 69% of organizations were compromised via an unknown or unmanaged or poorly managed internet-facing asset last year, that's another stat that raises eyebrows. So 69% of organizations compromised by an unknown, unmanaged, or poorly managed internet-facing device. That's only getting worse. Well, one of the major items for that we as security professionals need to recognize is that cybersecurity is going through a land shift right now. Not only is it akin to economic warfare in terms of where the attacks are coming from and where the attacks are going, i.e. where there aren't, it isn't the hackers from Alabama that are hitting the hackers in Arkansas. We live in a world right now where if you go to a security conference here in the US, you're likely going to see a lot of people in hoodies. You go to a security conference in Russia, you see people in suits. These are careers over there. They are paid as corporate careers. They make their life out of this, and they are not the primary organizer. Someone else is the organizer, and they go hire the people to do this. This is only going to get worse. The biggest thing that makes me worried about how bad the cybersecurity landscape looks over the next 10 years is actually developments around Web3, where now the bad actors can shift from having to infect devices or steal data to then go make money after that. Now they can just steal the money directly. And so obviously the fact that those attacks come from outside in is why this macOS malware presentation is very relevant, and it's important to dive into. So here's why I'm talking to you today. The reality is that malvertising is the #1 vector for macOS malware. For those of you that don't know Thomas Reed, he's one of the OGs of Mac malware research. He was actually presenting last week at the Objective-C conference, which is called it's the world's only Macintosh conference, and his presentation there was quite fascinating if you're interested in diving really into more of the history as well as the technical characteristics of both Apple's security framework, but also of these different malware families. Highly recommend his talk. I was really interested. I learned a lot from it. What's interesting about how Malwarebytes, and every security company, ourselves included, plays with these problems and how we try and protect them, is that fundamentally there's been a lot of fear around malvertising for a long time. There's been very few facts. So an ex-CRO of Trend Micro once told me that, oh yeah, we used to sell on the fear of malvertising all the time. Seem very proud of that. For me, that's fundamentally part of the challenge here, because malvertising is a threat vector. So ads as a threat vector is something that fundamentally is not well understood by the cybersecurity industry. If you actually look at where malvertising comes from, there are kind of 3 primary paths. Either malvertising is coming through search ads, and that's both the search ads actually and the search results. Black hat SEO is absolutely a thing. Or it's coming through the ad tech ecosystem, so the premium publishers and through the malicious ad networks that can play and that can deliver that. Or it's coming through from social media or from other walled gardens. Now, each of these paths gives the bad actor a different vector where they can pay to play. That is the biggest nuance of malvertising versus every other threat vector that exists, is that fundamentally it allows sophisticated bad actors to not just choose who they want to reach, they can pay someone else to do the work to reach them. At the end of the day, Confiant is, we've built the business around what we believe to be 2 truths that will never change. 1, there will always be assholes. There will always be people who are attacking others, trying to steal from others, and make their living from it. That is not going to change, unfortunately. Second, though, is that digital ads will always be the best way to reach people. That is that path. This is an industry that did last year $65 billion and is growing has been doing over 20% compound annual growth for 20 plus years, whose sole purpose it is to create pathways to allow paying clients to reach individuals that they want to get a message in front of. And so there is obviously a conflict of interest. The ad industry knows that the dollars they get from the bad actors are not worthwhile. But being able to decipher which dollar is good and which dollar is bad is a very difficult thing. And so if you're interested to dive into malvertising and learn a lot about it, then I highly recommend you check out matrix.confiant.com. We have mapped the vector. So there are 9 different tactics with 80 plus different techniques that we've mapped out. Within our threat intel, we've got 27 different intrusion sets, 19 different threat actors, and all that lives within this matrix, so that it was an effort on our part to create a common language so that we as security professionals can talk about this vector, because without this structure, it's just the fear. This is the facts. This allows us to actually look precisely into what is malvertising doing, and contextualize it, so as to understand where is the actual risk to you, to your enterprise, to your users, etc. And so how did we do this? So 2 minutes about just quick story about Confiant. So Confiant, we're 9 years old, founded by our CTO and myself. And we've spent the past 9 years building integrations deep into the ad tech infrastructure. And today we integrate at 3 different layers. So we're integrating with the buyers. So we're looking at the pipes pre-auction. We're integrated with the exchanges, actually integrating into where the decision logic occurs in terms of what gets served to whom and when. And then we're integrated post-auction with the actual publishers. This 3-level system allows us to track whatever happens inside those pipes. And what happens changes quite a lot. So our detection signals have turned over consistently every 2 years, 100% turnover every 2 years. That's a lot of shift. That's a lot of change. And if you actually look, if I was giving you this presentation last year, or rather, if I was giving you this version of the presentation from 6 months, I bet you that most of it, in terms of malvertising, I'd be talking to you a lot more about the surge in tech support scams than just the macOS malware. There's a lot of different movement in how this vector is used, but there are certain pillars of it that remain very consistent. And so that visibility that we have has allowed Confiant to do some really interesting macOS malware research. So let's be clear, we are not a macOS malware research shop. We are specialists in ads as a vector for cyber threats, and so we work to protect that infrastructure, protect the users that are being hit by that. But it's just with that, without any focus, without any deep focus, we've been able to be one of the leading researchers in the field of macOS malware simply because of the visibility we have, and the accuracy of that visibility. Anyone who's looking to know what comes through the ad tech infrastructure and monitor it as a vector of attack, if they're trying to do it from the outside, there's just way too much noise. So we see right now on an average day about 2.5 billion client-side events and over 200 billion server-side events. That is a non-trivial set of data. So finding the noise to signal within that is the challenge. We run at about 0.25% of those client-side events as actually malicious events every day. So it's a non-trivial number of detections. But so specific to Mac malware, actually in 2021, because of that visibility, we were the cybersecurity company that had the most most families of signed and unsigned malware being detected. So we're the first to detect a lot of this stuff. There's 2 of these that I'm especially proud of. One, Hydromac, and then Seaflower. Both of them were cross-posted to Patrick Wardell's blog. Patrick is also a real OG in the Mac security world, and maybe even the original one. And so we're super proud about that. But this last one, Seaflower, very fascinating stuff, because it's actually fairly rare to see iOS malware. And these were backdoored apps that were trying to steal money, i.e. Web3 dollars. The presentation will be online after, and all these links, feel free to click, read. If you're also interested in talking to the security researchers, we integrate our security team very forward in our discussions, and so happy to connect you with them at any time. So what are those, when we think of malvertising, obviously today's presentation has been macOS malware, very focused, but there are other attack types in our malvertising data set that we believe is very important from an endpoint protection point of view. So obviously macOS malware, yes. The data we can provide on that includes post-infection traffic. We can provide the hashes and the binaries, and we can also do very deep tactical threat intelligence on it. Our team are some of the leading expert macOS researchers in the world for that. But in addition to that, there's other avenues of attack within malvertising that we think are relevant. So within those 80 plus different techniques, the other attack types include tech support scams. So this is the major, absolutely major source of credential theft. The social engineering at play here is very risky. There was some recent research published actually that showed that 1 in 10 millennials, and so not just old people fall for this, young people fall for this as well from a tech support scam perspective. There was some data released recently by the FBI that talked about how 1 in 10 millennial who is presented with a tech support scam falls for it. That's a high hit rate. 10% is a very high hit rate, especially when you consider the actual spread of how these can be put in front of people at scale. On top of that, though, fake software downloads. So I talked about search ads as being a major vector for malware. The typical attack through search right now that is very relevant to you all has to do with fake software downloads, where if you don't actually limit what your users can do in terms of installing software from the internet onto their devices, and they go off and they go look for Signal, or they go look for Telegram, or they look for Brave, the browser. Signal, by our last count, 30% of the ads showing on the search result of when I type in Signal is malware. That's a huge risk for me. So that one's a big one. And then finally, the confirmed threat actor infrastructure. The threat actors we've been tracking, most of them we have multi-year visibility onto their systems, and it allows us to, and that infrastructure is we're not talking about the ad serving domains for the individual ad creator, we're talking about the underlying deep infrastructure related to that group. And so understanding where those intermediate domains are and being able to decloak them and understand who's delivering what payload, that's a key part. And so that's also data that we think is really interesting, and we'd love for you to come and talk to us at our booth. So we're just up outside on the right. Please come and talk to us. You can play around with our threat intelligence platform that we've built that hosts all this data. We are also looking for beta clients of this product. We should shortly be leaving alpha within a month. And so we already have 2 major Fortune 50 companies that will be testing out this data set and understanding how it hits their endpoints and whether it's valuable or not. And we're looking for another 3 slots. So if you would like to join us, please, and come talk to us. And thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And